I'm Tony, the game director and co-founder here at Player First Games. We're here today to give you a first look at our new game, MultiVersus.
It's been a little over a year now since MultiVersus was revealed officially. After the game was revealed last November, it eventually became apparent that the MultiVersus hype train was more like a hype roller coaster. The initial reveal sparked the interest of the internet. It wasn't huge, but people were intrigued by the idea of a platform fighter with big IPs, good online, and a budget and polish. Fast forward 6 months, and the advertisements started to hit. The game showed off its gameplay in more detail, trailers started to come out, and players actually got the chance to play the game for themselves. Hype started to swell, but due to the alpha being closed to the public, it didn't reach its fever pitch yet. Then, the dam broke. The open beta launched, and MultiVersus started to break records. It became the 2-time most played fighting game on Steam. It was rocking Twitch viewership, and it seemed like every big YouTuber with an attachment to Smash or fighting games was covering the game. This period is where the astronomically large all-time concurrent player base comes from, but if you keep looking at the screen, you might see something concerning. The current player base. You see, this game fell off, and it fell off hard. It's by no means a dead game, but it's pretty damn far from the peaks that it once knew. Today, I wanted to talk about the things MultiVersus can do to win back its player base, and how the game needs to move forward in 2023. But first, a word from our sponsor, subscribing. You see, I like to get subscribers. It makes that special part of my brain tingle when I see the number go up, and honestly, it just gives me an excuse to drink on stream, to celebrate. Thanks for hearing me out. Now let's get into the actual video. So before we explain what the game needs to go forward, we need to figure out why the game fell off in the first place. I made a video on this before where I pinned the blame on character choice, but honestly, I don't think I was completely right. I've given this a lot more thought since then, and it definitely boils down to more than they picked the wrong characters. So what could the actual reason be? Well, believe it or not, it's because MultiVersus is not a finished game. I do not believe the developers intended this game to become the success it did as early as it did. Instead, I think they wanted the name of their studio to ring true, Player First Games. In my mind, they probably wanted this game to be built by their players, for their players, and they can't do that without letting the players actually play the game. This would also explain why they had technical tests as early as 1 month after their initial reveal. They wanted feedback to build this game. You may ask, well, why the cinematic trailer then? Surely they knew that would grab people's attention. And yeah, you'd be right about that. It's a good question. Still, I think it's easily answered. They wanted people to see the trailer so they could get as many people into their alpha and beta as possible. The more people playing a beta and giving feedback, the better. With that said, I would definitely be willing to bet they weren't planning on grabbing the attention of so many players. Over 20 million people tried the open beta for MultiVersus. 20 million. MultiVersus isn't even complete yet, and it's outperformed almost every fighting game that's ever released. Now, the game has lost a lot of those players, but it's still a good sign that that many people had interest in the incomplete game in the first place. So what's the deal? Are these players gone forever? I honestly don't think so. I think they're kind of just waiting on a signal. At any time, I truly believe that Player First Games can add someone highly requested like Ben 10, or their first big third-party character, release a new cinematic trailer, and get a ton of those players back. That's great news, right? They should absolutely do this as soon as possible. It could save the game. Honestly, I think we should slow down a bit and do what I failed to do last time I covered this topic. Let's look at the bigger picture. If MultiVersus lost most of its player base due to it being incomplete, then lighting the beacon too early would just result in the same thing happening again. While I think most players would be willing to give the game a second chance, I think it's highly unlikely people would be willing to give a third or fourth chance. The moment they light the beacon will be the make or break moment for MultiVersus. In order for the game to actually make it, We need to let the developers get the game to a finished state. They need to add key features, build up the roster and stage list, and supply the players with a plethora of modes. It's no easy task, but it's a good thing I'm here with my non-existent game development experience to tell them how they should save this game. The first thing I want to address is the online. If you follow even one MultiVersus competitor on Twitter, you will see so much crying over the netcode. You would think this game plays worse than Smash based on what they're saying, but this is totally bogus. The game has server-based rollback netcode. If you don't know what rollback netcode is, let me teach you very quickly. There are largely two things that affect connection quality: the distance between two players and the actual quality of the player's internet connection. Distance is pretty self-explanatory, but there are a bunch of factors that change the quality of someone's internet connection. What is their actual upload and download speed that their internet service provider gives them? Are they hardwired into their modem or router? Do they play on Wi-Fi, which is much less consistent? In games without rollback netcode, whenever the connection quality between the two players dips, it will add frames of delay to the player inputs to compensate. This is why you press up B in Smash Ultimate and Mario actually does the move a full second later. Most fighting games are also peer-to-peer, so if someone from the East Coast in the US connects with someone on the West Coast in the US, it's going to add some frames of delay as well. MultiVersus doesn't have this problem thanks to its rollback netcode. Rollback is complicated to explain, so I'm going to let a smarter man than me explain how it works. Meet Adam Keats Hart. He's one of the developers from a little game called Killer Instinct, which is a game that dropped in 2013, yet it still has some of the best online in the business. Let's have Keats tell us exactly how rollback works.
You have to solve that problem, and the way you do that is rollback netcode. Rollback netcode also solves a lot of other problems, which you can see when you hop online. You play somebody from Europe, yeah, there's occasional visual artifacts or whatever, but it feels like offline, and the reason it feels like offline is because the game doesn't wait for the opponent's inputs. So in delay-based netcode, you're going to need to have both your inputs, which you have as soon as you press them, and your opponent's inputs in order to go to the next frame. Let's say your ping is 90 to your opponent in delay-based netcode. That's round trip. Ping time's round trip, right? So we're looking at one frame being 16.6 milliseconds. It's roughly going to be a 6-frame round trip. So we already have my inputs. I don't have to send those and wait for them to come back. I need to wait for my opponent's inputs. So that's going to be about 3 frames. So if you have about a 90 ping and conditions are good, you could play a delay-based netcode game like Guilty Gear with 3-frame delay. That's pretty okay, right? That's not the worst. The problem is that because you have to wait for their information to come, what happens when the ping changes? And we all know it's not stable. It's 90, sometimes it's 80, sometimes it spikes to 120. Now the delay has to change dynamically. So the implication of that is that, oh, I'm getting used to the timing of being 3 frames behind. Shoot, now suddenly it's 5 frames behind for a few seconds, and I've missed what I needed to hit. Oh, now it's back to 3, okay, right? And some games display that in real time at the top, other games hide it from you. And then you get into real trouble when you drop packets. What if the information doesn't come at all? And of course the game is going to bundle the next frame of inputs with the previous few frames in case that happened, so it can figure it out. But in delay-based netcode, the game's over when you don't have the opponent's inputs. We cannot go to the next frame, so the game just stops. And you've seen it, we've all seen it. The game just stutters, and it chunks out, right? The whole thing just freezes and stops, and it can't even take your inputs during those frames. So if you happen to be in the middle of like a quarter circle or a dragon punch, when it freezes, you might miss that direction entirely and you don't get your move, right? And people will call that eating inputs. And then you eventually get your opponent's data, and it does its thing to catch back up or whatever, but it just feels like garbage. The delay is changing, the game is stuttering. You need to have really ideal connections to play with people who are strictly wired, no Wi-Fi, people who are under 90 ping, very specifically. It's the only way you're going to have a decent match with people. And you introduce the idea of rollback netcode. And how rollback netcode works is that we never wait for the next frame. We still have our delay of, let's say, 2 or 3 frames, whatever the developer thinks is right. So we're still going to wait 3 frames just to wait for things to get to us. So let's say we're at 90 ping in rollback netcode. 3 frames later, my inputs are gonna play because we have that delay of 3. And I've got your inputs now, it's gonna play. It's just like delay-based netcode. It's literally identical. Rollback is delay-based netcode, but it's got more features. So what happens when I don't get your input or the delay changes? That's what rollback does differently. Instead of stopping and waiting for your inputs, what rollback does is it says, I have my local inputs, I'm going to the next frame. I don't care. I'm gonna predict what my opponent was doing. And all we do for that prediction is we just replay whatever was happening on the last frame. If they're holding forward, it's a pretty safe assumption that they're probably gonna continue to hold forward. Maybe they stopped, maybe they didn't, but we're gonna pretend they did. But in most cases, I would say 80% of the time in a fighting game, you're in a committed action. You've already jumped. There's nothing you can input to change that. You're already in a Fierce Punch. That's the next 45 frames of your life, is you doing that Fierce Punch animation. Nothing can change that. So if that hiccup happens to happen during that time, literally no visual artifacting can happen. It'll be exactly what the game thought it would be. But in the odd cases where somebody was walking forward, we thought they would continue to walk forward, but they actually jumped or they actually hit a button, we're gonna get their inputs a few frames later because they dropped them or because the ping went up. And then the game is going to be able to look at the game state, rewind a few frames to where we didn't have the inputs and say, did this match? Did what we get match exactly what we guessed? And if it didn't, it resimulates the game state in one frame back up to the current frame, totally invisible to the player, and then just renders the next frame normally. So in most cases, this will be like an invisible kind of correction. I'll do like a little posing here, and for a punch, right? You'll have anticipation poses. Your character, let's do like a Jago overhead. He puts his hand up here almost instantly. And he holds up here for like 3-4 frames before he starts to chop downwards. Say we have to roll back because we didn't get that input, and then we have to resimulate up. So we missed the first 2 frames of it. So instead of him going up here for 4 frames and then chopping down, he goes up here for 2 frames and then he chops down. That's invisible to the naked eye. No one will notice that that happened. Some things you will notice is if a character we expected to walk forward suddenly goes backwards and their walk speed is really high, you'll see them, instead of smoothly going like this, you'll see them kind of jerk and pop to the other side, right? But if your rollback is built correctly, it's very hard to see those types of things happen. They almost never happen at 90 milliseconds. You'll see them a tiny bit more, but they're hidden pretty well at 150 ping. At 200 ping, you'll see some visual artifacts, but you'll always feel the same. Your end is always 3 frames. Your combos always work the same. Your reaction time is always the same.
Rollback is a great way for online fighting games to avoid adding additional frames of delay to your moves, but it doesn't fix bad connections. If you play against someone whose internet provider is Boingo Wireless, they play on Wi-Fi, and they have 7 siblings all downloading something at the same time, it's going to be rough. There's no netcode that exists that can remedy that. Even if MultiVersus is server-based, all that really does, as far as I'm aware, is mitigate distance. If an East Coast player and a West Coast player connect in MultiVersus, they should be able to connect to a server in the middle of the US. There are other little things that being server-based helps with, but it still needs the inputs from the player with a bad connection so the game can display what that player actually did. Bad internet is bad internet. The reason why the game servers seem to be getting worse is simple. The player base is a whole lot smaller than it used to be. There are far less possible connections to pair you against than there were in July, and if you're a high-ranking player, there aren't many people you're going to be able to be paired with in the first place. You need to understand that if you're in the top 1% of players, you have less options than someone who's only in the top 50% of players. Honestly, now you're probably only looking at a pool of 50 to 100 possible opponents if you're that highly ranked. With such a small sample size, you're probably going to get people who are either far away or have a less than ideal internet connection. Sorry, you're going to have to get over it. There's a reason people still go to locals in tournaments even when they play a game with good netcode. It is impossible for online to perfectly emulate offline environments. This is why League of Legends tournaments are held at LANs and not online. Fighting game veterans Maximilian Dude and Sajam both played MultiVersus, and they had nothing bad to say about the netcode.
for the most part, when you clicked the button and you made a party with a friend, you got a match and it worked. And there wasn't an insane amount of input delay. It wasn't rollbacking all over the goddamn place. It was a functioning experience. It was a game that actually you were just able to enjoy and figure out stuff. And I think people take that shit for granted a lot of the time. So that's one thing I have to give MultiVersus like a huge shout out for.
They have 100% played more online fighting games than the people complaining about servers. It's a non-issue like 99% of the time, and when servers are an issue, it usually gets fixed pretty quickly. Now let's talk about a change to the online that could actually help the game retain players when they return. Give people more to do, and give them a reason to grind. It's that simple. As of right now, the only way you can play MultiVersus online is in 2v2s and 1v1s, and you can't even play those modes in ranked. Now, I'm not too worried about ranked. We've already had the chance to test drive the mode, and it'll be fully implemented sooner rather than later. What we really need is a solution to the extremely limited possibilities for MultiVersus party sizes. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You and a friend were going to play MultiVersus, but a third friend got on, so you switched to something you could all play. It's something that happens to me all the time, and there's a pretty simple solution. Fix private lobbies and add King of the Hill. Private lobbies are pretty scuffed in MultiVersus. There's no real easy way to cycle through players after a match ends. Even in Smash Ultimate, which has notoriously awful online, you can make an 8-person lobby that cycles through players, gives people the option to go AFK or spectate, and it just looks nice. There are even little bonus features like changing the room's music or using pre-made chats to communicate. It's genuinely a great online lobby system, and MultiVersus could massively benefit from copying the homework and changing a couple of the answers. Still, there's the issue of queuing into matches if you want to level up your characters, or if you and your friends just want to play against other people in a public setting. This is where King of the Hill comes in. With King of the Hill, you can make a public King of the Hill with any party size up to 8. This means that you and your friends can actually play MultiVersus with your third friend or your fourth friend. Isn't that dope? Now, a lot of you might point out that adding 3v3s and 4v4s would help with this too, and you're right. However, 3v3 and 4v4 will probably also require making bigger stages, which takes a lot more work and is way more resource intensive. They also exclude parties of odd numbers. Good luck queuing 3v3 and 4v4 if your party is made out of 5 or 7 people. King of the Hill is perfect because it works for every single party size. You can solo queue into it if you want a change of pace. You can duo queue into it with your partner, or you can add however many friends you want, up to 8. It's actually perfect, and there's a reason King of the Hill is a staple in so many fighting games. NetherRealm games are some of the games that popularized it, and by the way, NetherRealm games are some of the best-selling fighting games that exist. Even Smash's lobbies function like King of the Hill. I genuinely think that after Ranked gets added permanently, King of the Hill becomes the highest priority out of the possible new modes. Now it is time to discuss the subject of my last video, character choice. To be fair, I wasn't completely wrong. If their goal is to get back as many of their lost players as possible, they should absolutely be adding the big characters everyone wants. Scorpion, Sub-Zero, Ben 10, Daffy Duck, Marceline, Jon Snow, Mordecai, Rigby, and of course Godzilla and Walter White if they're possible. You add these characters and make a cinematic trailer, people will come back, but I don't think their goal is bringing back players right now. Like I said earlier, people won't be likely to stay if they come back to an unfinished game, and player-first games are being really smart with their character choices. We are currently in what will likely be the lowest point for MultiVersus. In a year, I'll be stunned if the player base is smaller than what it is right now. Why would they add the big hitters then, when they could just build up the roster with characters that won't have a chance later? Characters like Gizmo, Stripe, the Wicked Witch, Beetlejuice, and Sloth aren't likely to keep up momentum for the game if they're added after the beacon is lit. So, just add them now. Of course, I think it's also important to give players 1 or 2 big characters per season, but they're already doing this. They added Rick and Morty for Season 1, and you can argue that Black Adam's a big character, but I really don't think he is. But still, Rick and Morty were some of the most requested characters for the game, and it seems like they'll be adding at least the Joker for this season. That's honestly perfect. It's not ideal for all of you 4 MultiVersus accounts, I'm sure, but that's honestly whatever. I don't care. I'd rather get less exciting characters now than jeopardize the health of the game in the future. Close your eyes and use your imagination, okay? We're gonna do a fun little exercise. A cinematic trailer drops next summer. It announces the game is exiting the beta. All of the characters added throughout the beta are given a short spotlight in the trailer, and it ends with some doofus 10-year-old yelling, "It's hero time." That's Ben 10. The dumb 10-year-old is Ben 10. Now imagine the very next character after Ben 10 is Scorpion from Mortal Kombat. Then we get Marceline, then Sub-Zero, then Raven, then Godzilla, then Walter White. Are you seeing what I'm saying? Sure, some of this is too good to be true, but if they do save some of their big guns to follow up the full launch of the game, I think it'll be pretty easy for them to keep up momentum. On the other side, is there an argument to be made for adding the popular characters now, so that they're already in the game when the relaunch comes? Yeah, absolutely, but we can still do that to a certain extent. Like I said, we can add a couple of characters with big appeal like Rick and Morty, the Joker, Daenerys Targaryen, and Jon Snow throughout the beta seasons. After all, I think a lot of people would be disappointed if we were only limited to these less popular characters for now. But like it or not, this game is going to have the Wicked Witch, it's going to have Beetlejuice, it's going to have Sloth. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We might as well get them now instead of putting them off until after players come back when they can completely cool off the excitement for the game. When we light the beacon for people to return, sure, we want what's already in the game to help entice them to stay, but something just as important is giving players something to come back to with each new update. There is no amount of content a game can add that will keep people playing it forever. That's the unfortunate truth for multiplayer games. The new, hotter thing will always come back. That's why we need to save some of our hotness for post-launch. You see what I'm saying? Despite adding every big character not being the right move for the game at the moment, I do think stages are pretty important to add right now. Having a wide variety of competitively viable stages ready by the time we get players back is one of the most important ways to keep the game from feeling repetitive. Most people only stick to a handful of characters in fighting games anyways, but everyone plays on all of the stages. In Season 1, we only got one new stage at the very end of the season, and I do not see a world where it is ever allowed in Ranked. But the good news is this season is already doing a lot better. They added in a new stage for Game of Thrones, the player base likes it, and it looks pretty likely that we'll get to have the stage for Ranked. Beautiful. More of that, please. I think it is crucial to get in at least 4 to 5 more ranked viable stages before we try to bring players back. If Player First Games can accomplish that, ooh baby, they're cooking with gas. So yeah, that's the path I think MultiVersus can take to bring back their players. It's a ton of work, but finishing a game with lasting appeal in the current era of gaming is a colossal task. The team at Player First Games is doing a great job, but there's still a lot of work to be done. I'm sure they'd agree with me too. I don't think the game was ready for the sheer number of people who wanted to try it in July, but really, I think that's a good thing. That many people were already interested in an unfinished game without the characters they wanted. It's a good sign for the health of the game once it's out of beta. The game is not dead, not even close. What's important right now is continuing to give feedback. Thanks to them releasing this as a beta, we've seen sweeping changes to improve hitboxes, servers, and whiff recovery. They're even gearing up to transition characters' hitboxes to 2D so that the Z-axis doesn't cause moves to miss anymore. This game has a bright future, and I'm sure that by the end of 2023, we'll be seeing most of what people have been asking for. The word of the day is patience.
Patience.
You're playing a game that warns you of its incomplete status every time you log in. A game that, despite this, managed to win Fighting Game of the Year, a game that broke records despite not being finished. Imagine what this game can do if you actually give the devs time to finish it. With all of that said, this has been Nosy Boy. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll smell you guys later.
So.